What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Power Rangers Hyperforce episode 10 now. Episode 10, I want to say up front, is probably either my favorite episode or one of my top episodes for this entire show so far. It was such a good episode. There were so many great things that happened. We got so many questions answered that we've been wanting to know since episode 1, specifically about the Rangers' past. As many people know, we've been wondering several things about Marv. We've been wanting to know about Eddie. People have been wanting to know about Chloe because Chloe's been like the most mysterious out of anyone. Everyone wants to know about everyone else, and it's just sort of like, who are these people? We want to know. They want to know. It's important. So this episode really does a good job at giving us some information finally. A lot of stuff up until now was kind of hinting or kind of giving a little detail here and there, but never giving us that full access feel of knowing what we want to know. This was our first opportunity at actually seeing some stuff with these characters, which was so great to see. So let's get started. There's a lot of stuff that happened this episode. And it was a really emotional episode. Definitely something that I would say. Very emotional. I was beyond amazed at how that worked out. And I loved it. I thought it was really, really good what they did. I thought it was a lot of fun. So the episode starts off with the Rangers. Obviously in the last episode they were saying goodbye to Anton and Dr. O. So now they're teleported to another part of Reefside. When they get there, they end up finding that there's this stolen ship that the Alliance took, and they think that they're going to be able to go get it, but then Scorpina comes off the ship, and she appears now after us not seeing her for quite some time, and she plans to attack them. So she initially does. The Rangers fight back, and there's a bunch of conflict there, like Jack loses his weapon temporarily, and then Eddie gets it back. There's just small little bits of conflict. Eventually she's knocked out, and then the Rangers restrain her and bring her on their ship, which is interesting, because when they bring her on their ship, what happens is that she doesn't really confess anything. She leaves things fairly mysterious. There's some confession later on, but the point is that things get very interesting very fast. When they get on the ship, they try to talk to her, they try to offer her food, and the Rangers continue to press her for information. Eventually, what's brought up is the Z waves, which is really important. Now, those that have watched Power Rangers might know what the Z wave is. It is the Zordon wave. It is the wave that happens in Power Rangers in Space during the final episode of the season, when Zordon is destroyed by Andros, and the Z wave, or Zordon's energy when he's destroyed, spreads across the universe, destroying all forms of evil and turning those that were like the major villains that were human in some way, like Zed, Rita, Divatox, those villains into human forms, and then everything else was completely destroyed rather than existing. It was all turned to dust. So like they basically go over that whole background, and the idea is that they think, and they come up with this assumption, it's not clear yet, but it's pretty likely, is that the United Alliance of Evil, and I may wonder was that was the Alliance of Evil that was made during Power Rangers in Space. It was the alliance that was formed that included the villains from old seasons of MMPR, Zeo, Turbo, and In Space. It was that big alliance that they formed. You saw it in the very first episode of In Space, and it was kind of talked about initially in Turbo. So the thing is that basically the idea is that they're trying to bring back this alliance, bring back the old evil, and also have the new, more current evil, and make it so that all this evil from all these different seasons can come together in one place and take over the universe in the present time of 2017 or whatever. So that's pretty interesting to think about, and it makes a lot of sense just from the fact that it's the United Alliance of Evil, the Alliance. Get it? So totally makes sense. It definitely brings things into perspective, and yeah, it works. So that is something to consider. Again, it hasn't been confirmed, but it is a point that was brought up, which is really, really important. So I actually like the idea that they might be going into that, and I think that's like so good. I love that idea. So continuing on, though, they try to befriend Scorpina, and things continue to get interesting with her. She eventually knocks out the lights, and the Rangers are stuck in the hyperstream of space and time, meaning that they are not in any particular time period. They are just stuck in time and in space, like they are when they travel to different time periods. So what happens is that in this time they have to actually go through the ship and find out where Scorpina is, because she actually disappears, and so they wonder where she had went. So they end up traveling around. Initially, they split into two teams, and the way that it starts off, I believe, is there's Vesper, Chloe, and Jack, and then the other team is Eddie and Marv. When Vesper, Chloe, and Jack are together, they actually go to the kitchen to check if the kitchen's all good. Turns out it's fine. Then they check the living quarters. Living quarters is pretty interesting because we actually find out that there is this ghost there, this demon, this demon from Jack's past. What is this demon? It is Forge, his dog. And that's the thing that's really important about this episode. Again, as I said before, this episode is very heavy on character plots and story on them. So what happens in this is that we end up seeing Jack's dog Forge. Thing is that Forge is supposed to be dead. He was a cyber dog that was supposed to have been completely put out 10 years ago, meaning that he couldn't be real. So the question is that how could this be? This was a dog that he cared for so much, and it shouldn't be real, and they try to pet it, and it feels real. It feels like it's the real thing. It acts like itself. It doesn't seem that weird. There's nothing that really implies that it couldn't be itself until it disappears. So then, following all this, what happens is that we have Eddie and Marv that are also talking, and they're in the engine room. They're trying to fix some cables, and eventually, what happens is that a person dressed in a Time Force outfit appears out of nowhere. This person is Joe, Marv's brother. Now the thing is that I'm not 100% sure about this, but I believe the whole idea, and I knew that they say this later on, is that supposedly Marv's brother is dead. So thing is that we see him here. His name's Joe. This is obviously, for those that don't know, referencing Super Sentai, because again, Marv, the actor who plays him, Peter Sederso, is into Super Sentai, and like Marv is based off of Marvelous from Gokaiger, so they made the brother Joe from Gokaiger. If you know that season, it makes sense, even though in that show they weren't brothers, but I like the kind of idea that they were going for there. I see what Peter was probably doing with his own character there, so that was kind of clever. And so what ends up happening is that following all this, what they end up doing is that, Marv really breaks down. He hasn't seen his brother in years. He's been looking for him forever. And we get to learn some stuff about Marv. This kind of happens over time, what we get to learn. And I'm not going to go into it right away here because more happens. So what they eventually end up doing is that, Marv breaks down in front of his brother. They hug. Eventually, when they try to hug at one point, Joe ends up knocking into him, and then he fades from existence. At that point, Marv cries. It's really emotional, some of this stuff that happens here. Eventually, we have it where Eddie ends up going off with the others because, Eddie doesn't think that this is real, and he thinks that they should be away from this fake joke, which shouldn't exist. And so at that point, he ends up joining the others. Eventually, what happens is that Eddie and Vesper are called to go to the med bay to help out with Alpha to fix the energy cells there. So they're called in there. Meanwhile, Jack and Chloe are looking after Marv. And what eventually happens is that we have it where a ghost from Eddie's past appears. This ghost being Bianca. Bianca apparently is a girl that he was friends with when they were kids. And what happened was that during the time that they were kids, he actually was supposed to, he had an arranged marriage set up. They were supposed to be set to marry each other. And the thing was that it didn't work out, obviously. Now, we don't know if she was dead or why aren't they in the relationship anymore, and why didn't Eddie mention this or whatever. We don't know that whole element, which is still a mystery. Like, what's the whole specifics there? Like, it was a thing, but why isn't it a thing? Is she dead? What happened? So again, we don't know. I'm sure we'll figure that out over time. That's still a big mystery, but it is something to mention. And eventually, like, Vesper comes in and she gets annoyed, and then she does like this tackle, which ends up leading to like this ghost disappearing, and then her giving Eddie a hug and kind of getting annoyed at him for like, who is this figure and all that. So it leads to that kind of conversation, and eventually Eddie goes in to help fix the machine again. This time Vesper's left out because she is, and she's actually confronted by a form of Eddie. This is another Eddie that is not him, which is a ghost version of him that's basically telling them about, who tries to act very suave and cool, and tries to get Vesper's attention. But the thing is that Vesper's already made it clear to Eddie that they're not going to date until they complete their mission, and she can tell right away that things aren't that they don't seem normal. So again, there's a lot of different hints here. So all this is happening. Eventually, all the Rangers do meet up in one place to discuss what they've learned from each other, and what we also find out finally is about Marv and Jack's interaction. As we know, for the longest time we've been wondering, what is that whole situation with Jack and Marv? What did Jack do, and what did Marv do? Well, thing is that back when Marv's brother was in Time Force, he went missing, and what happened was that at that point he kept on trying to get the Time Force to go searching for his brother. Everyone thought that Marv's brother was dead, and what happened was that eventually it's found out that that isn't the case. Actually, this happens on a different part. No. What happens is that eventually they split up again. This time it's Chloe, Marv, and Jack, and they're going somewhere else. But they explain this whole situation where, Joe was missing, and so since no one was looking, Marv decided to take Joe's Time Force badge, forge his identity to it, and create a new identity so that he could become a Time Force Ranger during his initial time of being a Time Force Ranger. And the thing was that he was doing this to find his brother. This was the main reason. So he was cheating on his exams, cheating to get into the Time Force academies, and eventually it was the only person that he shared this with was Jack, and that was the thing. He cheated. He didn't get in fairly. He got in because he was looking for his brother, and Jack basically told his commanding officer, because Time Force officers are meant to represent someone of esteem and someone of significance, not someone that's gonna cheat their way in. So he did this not because he didn't like it, but because he felt like he had to do it. And eventually, they did join up, and they now understand each other. Again, Chloe knows this now, so that's important. But following all this, there's a point where they realize that everyone's been found out, so most likely Chloe's the one that's going to be going after next. And Chloe is. So eventually she is told to go up front, be the sacrifice that actually has to meet this ghost. This time the ghost takes the form of her mother. Now this is the most emotional part of the episode. In fact, believe me, everyone was crying during this part. If you didn't watch it, it was such an emotional moment, because she basically spills her guts about everything. Because the idea is that her parents died. And the thing is that she doesn't believe it, but she still thinks that they're alive. And so the whole reason why she became a Time Force officer was because she wanted to find her parents. Now, the big difference between her and Marv is the fact that her story is way more painful, because both of her parents died, and she felt like when her parents died, she lost a part of her heart, and it just changed for her completely. And if you see that clip, where she just has this emotional breakdown, I mean, it is something else. It is really, really powerful. Totally worth watching if you haven't seen it yet. Oh my god, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how well they did that. They portrayed it so well. So, anyway, all this happens. Chloe eventually does say that, you may think that you're my parents, and I know that you're not. And like this fake Chloe's mother keeps on trying to convince her otherwise, but eventually she says, I may have lost my real parents, but I do have these rangers, and these rangers became my family, and they've really brought me back into a happier form. So it's just, there's a lot of sweetness and sorrow. It's just interesting. One thing that does happen prior to this, which is kind of like a funny moment, kind of sad, which people thought at first was going to be her ghost moment, is that the instant oven for the kitchen actually breaks at one point, and then she freaks out, and people were thinking that was going to be her ghost. It wasn't, but I'm glad that it wasn't. I thought it was good that they did what they did. Following all this, after all of them have come together, they initially question whether or not they are who they are. Because the thing is that for this whole time, they didn't, like, they've noticed how this figure has been able to shapeshift, and also been able to, run off wherever. And the thing is that at one point, I forgot to mention this, like right before this actually happens, when Marv and Jack are with Chloe, they actually go into the place, try to shoot at this figure. Actually, it turns into Jack's dog Forge, and then what happens is that the shot actually hits Chloe, so it hurts her. But what happens is that when they meet together, they all have to convince each other that they are who they are. And it's just interesting to see all these interactions, which give you clear hints, like basically clear up everything. But then the thing that I expected happened, which was, Alpha was the one that was questioning whether or not they are who they are. Because he is the one that wasn't the real Alpha at the time, because Alpha was being manipulated or something. So that was pretty interesting. So what happens is that eventually Alpha, this form of Alpha is taken out, and it turns out to be a villain from the past. This villain is someone from the second season of Mighty Morphin, and this is the second time that we've had a villain who was in the past season return. That was just a monster, not a general, not a main villain, a monster. The first one was Pudgy Pig. This one was Primitor. Primitor is a cool villain that had the ability to shapeshift, and in season 2 of Mighty Morphin, he had 2 appearances. He had one when Zed was there, and then he had one towards the beginning of the second season. And during that episode, during the first one, it was the episode where Alpha goes out of the base and helps a little kid play soccer or something like that. It's interesting, but Primitor basically takes the forms of the Rangers in that episode to mess with Alpha and create problems or whatever. It's interesting. So, anyway, what does happen following all this is they end up going to deal with Primitor. Primitor initially, when he's in Alpha's form, actually lands them on a planet that's unfamiliar to them in a different time. And when they have to fight Primitor, they're off the ship. They initially do some typical fighting, and things take a while. It's not a quick battle at all, but they do fight for a while. Eventually, they do form the Megazord, which is cool to see that. They use it. Eventually, the arms are actually ripped off, and that leads to some interesting battles because the arms get ripped off, and then at one point, they have it where the Rangers have to use their Zords, because what happens is that they still have the legs and the torso, but then when they try to do a kick, they lose balance, and then they have to pretty much revert back into their Zord modes and attack. And at one point they end up doing that. Doesn't really work very well because they're in bad shape. So then they end up doing the Phoenix Whirlwind with the Zord. And I forgot to mention this also, the Megazord. The Megazord this time around was able to use Chloe as the heart of the Megazord, which was cool. I like that because the idea that they explained was that basically when you're the heart of the Megazord, your abilities on your card is the abilities that the Megazord has. So say you're Chloe, you have the Phoenix Whirlwind, and that means the Megazord has that. and also they're able to fly in this Megazord formation, which is cool. So all this happens. Following all this, what does happen is that they eventually use the Phoenix Whirlwind with her Zord, and then the others use the Vector Blasters to try to destroy Premator. It doesn't really work very well. They do all sorts of different attacks. They even try to use those Zords again. Things just continue to get even more crazy, and eventually Premator is shrunken down to his normal size. At that point, Premator actually takes the form of like rocks and trees and other objects that are in the forest, and even takes the form of a chipmunk. At one point, what happens is that, like, you know, Marv tries to figure out where he is, and then Eddie tries to do it, and eventually they have a chipmunk that they end up finding, which turns out to be Premator. And it's pretty interesting because what happens is that Premator is the chipmunk that Marv has, that actually he wasn't looking for Marv. He was looking for someone else, clearly, because he says that. We don't know who he was looking for, because it could have been one of the other Rangers, or it could have been some villain. The thing is that later on they actually explain how things worked, though, with the past episode. Because as we know, we went to Dino Thunder last episode. So what we find out is that the Rangers end up seeing that Marv is put into a portal that they gain. Now this portal is their ability to teleport and also to create portals and all that. What is that a reference to? Well, what they discuss later on is that the reason why they went to 2005 was because of the fact that Mesagog had his portal technology that allowed him to travel between the normal world and his base. If you remember in the show, that was his special thing. He was able to travel between these two-dimensional planes or whatever it was, and they wanted to gain access to that. So that's what they have now. That's what they were able to do, because Scorpina was able to use it initially. That's what we assumed, because she was inside that portal, sitting there with all these other lackeys and monsters from the Alliance. And so what happens is that Marv is put into the portal, he's brought over, and he's supposedly on the Alliance ship. So the Rangers don't know what's going to happen next. What we do end up seeing following all this is that they try to head back towards their ship. They're going to try to speak to Jen Scott, and they get stopped by these 3 knights from the 6th century during the Dark Ages, which is pretty crazy. So this all happens. The Rangers basically are stopped there, and the episode ends. Overall, pretty interesting. Now, as far as my suspicions go with the 6th century knights, what this might be, and people are suspecting this, is that this might be the Mystic Force of the past. If you remember in Mystic Force, there was the Mystic Force Rangers from the past, and then there was the current one. So what they might do is they might have the Mystic Force Ranger, they might have a Mystic Force cameo happen, which is interesting, because this is like the first season that isn't necessarily like underrated, but isn't super popular. Like, it's not considered one of the most popular seasons, but it's one that people have been talking about for a while that they've wanted them to do. And it totally works for this show if it is that. People also were suspecting when they mentioned Mystic Knights, when Jack mentioned that was a reference to that they were going to actually have the Mystic Knights from the actual show of 1998. Not likely. Pretty much everyone confirmed it later on. In fact, in the Fireside Chat, they basically confirmed that idea, that like it was just Paulie saying it. It wasn't him saying it for Jack. Jack wouldn't know that. That's completely Paulie just saying something. Now, one other thing to mention about Premator that they actually explained later on, which was really cool, I actually liked it a lot, was the fact that if you don't know, Premator's first appearance, because again, he had 2 appearances in the show. During his first appearance, the person that actually voiced Premator was Paulie Schreier. So that's actually really cool that they actually did that. That he was the original voice during that 2nd season episode. So that's really neat to know. And it was kind of a fun throw-in that they had this villain that turned out to be that way. And like most people just didn't even realize that, oh yeah, Premator is voiced by Paulie, which is really like clever. I like that a lot. Unfortunately, we didn't get to hear Paulie do that voice, which personally, if they had brought him into the Fireside Chat, honestly, I'm sure most, if not all, people would have asked, hopefully, for that. Like, you know, for him to do the voice of Premator, if he remembers how to do it. Again, it's been a couple years, so he might not know, but it would be kind of cool. So I love Niggers of Pains. Did you guys enjoy this episode? I personally did a lot. I thought this episode was a lot of fun. It was a really good episode. Again, it was giving us a lot of detail on these Rangers. We still don't know a lot, but we know a lot more than we did know about their past and who they are, which I really, 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 really appreciated that. So I would love Niggers' opinions. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 31, and goodbye, guys.